Welcome to the Friday Five with Steve Greenfield on CBT News.
Welcome to this week's Friday Five, where we recap the last week's automotive technology deals. This is Steve Greenfield from Automotive Ventures, and thanks for joining us. We kick off today's show with some news hot off the press. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce David Steinberg, co-founder of both AdPearance and FourEyes and current CEO of FourEyes. David, welcome to the show.
Steve, thank you so much for having me. This is great to be here.
So I'm not going to talk about this. Let's just turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about your news and how you got here.
Well, Steve, I think you're sort of the penultimate guy right now who's breaking financing news. So I wanted to announce that, AdPearance and FourEyes, we just raised $10 million.
Congrats.
And completed that round. I think, while it's exciting, I think the reason I'm excited to be here today is I think there's actually some conversations about equity financing that are a little bit deeper that, as an industry, we should start to have. And, it's been hard to have it before we sort of ourselves had raised money, because I think people would look at us and say, well, the only reason you're saying that is because you haven't raised money. So I figured now that we've raised money, I can more have this conversation easier. So I thought your show would be a great outlet to discuss this stuff.
That's great. So let's dig in a little bit. Tell us how you got to the decision about raising money and the impact it's had on your employees and how you've incorporated them into that decision.
Yeah, I think that we've been very slow to raise money as an organization. AdPearance is 10 years old, FourEyes is 6 years old. I think one of the issues with equity financing, we sort of live in this Shark Tank culture right now, where we really celebrate equity financing as sort of the finish line. The reality, I think, is that equity financing is the most expensive form of capital a business owner can take on. If a business owner believes in their goals and their outcomes, it is literally the most expensive form of capital. And I think that, sort of the core issue with Shark Tank culture, I say, that we kind of live in right now, is that we're not rewarding all of the other things that entrepreneurs are successfully doing, especially as it relates to access to capital. Because equity financing is really access to capital. And when you look at, okay, how is my business have the right access to capital? Equity financing should be at the last thing you look at. And instead, I think we kind of look at it first. So we never, a little known secret about AdPearance and FourEyes is we actually did hard money loans. We did about $1 million of hard money loans. Entrepreneurs don't do that enough early on in our company, where, I put my equity on my house, I put my, my own personal wealth at stake, and I'm a ride or die guy. So I'm like, hey, look, if I don't believe enough to do this, then maybe I don't believe enough in my idea. Right. But what that created initially was, the ability to give more equity to our employees. And, we're in a time right now where the auto industry and all of us vendors, the software vendors, are creating incredible wealth and there's so much private equity money coming into our industry that the question becomes, well, how is that equity being distributed potentially down to the employees, some of the water carriers who are really carrying and really leading a lot of the innovation sort of behind the scenes. One of the other things that a few years ago, we got our first real big banking line. We were at about a $2 million line of credit, and we got it up to about $8 million. That $8 million line gave us the capital we needed. It was non-dilutive to our employees, and it really fueled our growth, and it created the ability to give a lot more wealth back to our employees.
That's great.
One of the things we've done is we have what we call our employee participation plan. And what we did in that is we allocated 20% of any exit, even in secondary capital. So if my business partner or I take money off the table, we have to pay out 20% to our employees.
Oh, wow, that's great.
And, we did that to really tie our outcome directly to our employees. So, to close some of the loopholes that exist in equity financing. And what that did, what was interesting about having this 20% employee participation plan is our employees, even today, are still our biggest, sort of non-founder shareholder. And it made us look at equity financing completely differently, where we said, how are we creating wealth? How are we maintaining the ability to create wealth for our employees? And under that, so many deals didn't make sense. Right. I think the other misnomer in equity financing is that money buys execution. Right. Money doesn't buy execution. execution buys execution.
Right.
I think we've proven as a team that we know how to execute. We know how to lean organizations by execution.
Right.
Or execute. So you look at, we just watched the Olympics. No one bets on the guy that's fat and happy, right? You bet on the guy that's hungry.
Right.
And so I think overcapitalizing your businesses that we're kind of going through a little bit right now.
Yep.
It potentially makes it harder to dilute real equity to your shareholder, to your employees, and it makes you less hungry and less lean.
What advice do you have to other entrepreneurs out there that are in a similar situation where they're contemplating, taking on debt versus equity, being employee friendly through that process? I mean, any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the employee participation plan we put in place has been great for our business. It's been great for retention. It's been great for aligning everybody. I think to look at the challenge differently, because as an entrepreneur with a successful business, my inbox is filled up every day with private equity companies saying, hey, we want to talk, we want to invest.
Yep.
But look at equity financing last, not first. Look at, access to bank capital is way less dilutive, way better when you can get it. Right. And I think so many, what I say to new startups or new young companies is, the second you start making money, put a finance person in there, run your books incredibly well. No funny business. Don't put any personal expenses in there. Keep your books really, really clean and work your bank every single year.
Right.
And, we've been in a changing climate since 2008. 2008, 2009 was tough with bank financing. And the banks have sort of loosened up a little bit. They're still, they're not nearly as loose as private equity. But if you can get bank financing, way less dilutive. And then the question is, how are you then sharing that with your employees? How are we as an industry creating wealth for employees? I mean, we have an opportunity here. I'm pretty comfortable with what I make in life, and I have an opportunity to create real wealth for my employees. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah. Well, that's great, David. Thank you for being such a thoughtful entrepreneur in the space. You don't often hear this story, so I appreciate you spending time with us today. Congratulations to your employees. It sounds like a very mutually beneficial culture that you've built. And at some point, love to dive into your philosophy on culture, but greatly appreciate you tuning in today and sharing this with our audience.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. You're doing great work out there. I think you're breaking all the news right now, so keep it up.
Thank you, David. We appreciate it very much. Thank you for tuning in to CBT News for this week's Friday 5, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Friday 5.